My brother once told me that people like me don't dream big enough. He said it at the dinner table, the way he said everything leaning back in his chair, swirling whatever expensive thing was in his glass, making sure everyone in the room was watching him before he opened his mouth. I was 28 years old. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital, and I was still in my scrubs. He looked at me the way you look at something you feel sorry for. "You're comfortable," he said. And comfortable is just another word for giving up. My mother nodded slowly, the way she always did when my brother spoke. My father said nothing, which was his way of agreeing. My husband reached under the table and found my hand, and I held on. I didn't say anything back. I never did, back then. I want to tell you who my brother is, so you understand everything that comes after. His name is Marcus, and he is 7 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the sun that our entire family orbited. He was the first one to go to college, the first one to wear a suit, the first one to use words at the dinner table that nobody else understood. When he started his first company at 31, my parents talked about it for months. My mother framed a newspaper clipping a small local business journal, barely a paragraph, and hung it in the hallway next to my grandmother's portrait. I remember looking at it every time I walked past. I remember thinking that I had graduated nursing school the same year, with honors, and there was nothing on that wall for me. That is not bitterness, that is just a fact. I need you to understand the difference, because bitterness would have made me do things very differently. Marcus's company was called Vantage Point Solutions. I never fully understood what they did, even after he explained it 3 separate times. Something about enterprise software, workflow automation, scalability frameworks. He had a way of describing his work that made it sound enormous and essential, while simultaneously making you feel too small to comprehend it. His wife, Diane, was the same way. She had perfect nails and a perfect blowout, and a habit of asking me questions about my job in a tone that suggested she considered nursing to be a kind of elaborate volunteering. "Isn't it exhausting?" she would ask. "All that. Physical labor?" My husband Derek is an electrician. He has calloused hands and a laugh that fills a room and the kind of steadiness that people mistake for simplicity until they need him. Diane once asked him, at a family barbecue, whether he had ever considered going back to school. Derek smiled at her and said he'd looked into it, but the licensing fees for electrical contractors in our state alone ran north of $2,000, so he figured he'd keep running his own business instead. Diane smiled back and said, "Oh, how sweet," and then turned to talk to someone else. Derek looked at me afterward and raised an eyebrow. I pressed my lips together. We didn't have to say anything. We had been together since I was 23. He proposed in our apartment kitchen, on a Tuesday, with a ring he had saved for over 2 years. No Instagram setup, no drone footage, just the 2 of us and a ring and a Tuesday. My mother asked, when I told her, whether he had a plan to grow the business. My brother shook his hand at the engagement dinner and said, very warmly, that he respected people who worked with their hands. The way he said it made it clear that respect was not the same as envy. For years, that was our life. Derek ran his electrical contracting business. I worked at the hospital, then picked up per diem shifts at a clinic on weekends, then slowly, carefully, started doing things with money that I never talked about at family dinners. I am not going to pretend I was a genius. I read books. I took an online course. I made some mistakes. But I also made some decisions that I kept very quiet, because I had learned early that when you share something good with certain people, they find a way to make it feel smaller, or to make it feel like it belongs to them too. My parents owned a piece of property about 40 minutes outside the city. It had been in our family for a long time, my grandmother's land, eventually passed to my father. There was a small structure on it, old and mostly unused, and about 3 acres of land. When I was 26, my parents were going through a rough patch financially. My father's business had slowed. My mother had medical bills. They mentioned, once, that they might have to sell the land. I didn't want them to sell it. Not for sentimental reasons. Exactly, though there were some of those too. I had looked at that land, and I had seen something. Not a mansion. Not a development. Just something solid and real that I understood the value of, when other people were still talking about disrupting industries. I offered to help. I gave my parents a sum of money, everything I had managed to save at that point, which was not nothing but was not a fortune, and we worked with a lawyer and a notarp, and the arrangement was clean and documented. I would become the legal owner of the land in exchange for the payment, which would clear their immediate debt. My parents would keep living in their house. The land and its structure would transfer to me. There was paperwork. There were signatures. It was not a handshake deal over the dinner table. I made sure of that. Marcus did not know. My parents didn't tell him, and I didn't tell him. And honestly, I don't think it occurred to either of my parents to mention it, because at the time, Marcus was busy launching his second venture, and nobody wanted to bother him with something as unglamorous as land documentation. That was 6 years before everything fell apart. I have to back up a little to explain how things fell apart, because it didn't happen overnight. It never does. It happens in layers, and the people in the middle of it usually can't see it clearly until the whole structure is already tipping. Marcus's first company had done well enough. He sold it at 34 for a number that sounded impressive at family dinners, but which, I later learned from Derek, who had done the math, was mostly absorbed by investor payouts and his own lifestyle expenses. He drove a Porsche he leased and lived in a house that, as Derek put it, one night, while we were washing dishes, was at least $500,000 above what their income should have supported. Liquidity, Derek said, rinsing a glass. He has the appearance of wealth and a cash flow problem. I said, please never say that at a family dinner. But Derek was right. I could see it, if I looked carefully. The way Marcus talked about his second company, Vantage Point Ventures, a pivot from the original, had a different energy than the first time. More urgent, more performance. He was raising money, always on the phone with investors, always about to close a round. Diane had started posting less on social media, which I noticed because Diane had been a very consistent social media presence for several years. I noticed these things. I didn't say them out loud. The first moment I understood something was truly wrong was at Thanksgiving, about 8 months before the anniversary party. Marcus arrived late and sat down and ate very little and spent most of the meal on his phone. My mother kept offering him more food, the way she always did when she was anxious, and didn't know how to address it. My father asked Marcus how the business was going, and Marcus said, really good, just navigating some growth challenges. And my father said, good, and that was the end of it. On the drive home, Derek said, he looked like someone who hasn't slept in 3 weeks. I thought about that for a long time afterward. 3 months later, my mother called me on a Sunday morning. She said she needed to talk to me about something, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she has been worrying about something for a while and has finally decided to address it. She told me that Marcus was in trouble, serious trouble, the kind that involved banks. The numbers she described were not small. There were business loans that had been personally guaranteed, which meant Marcus had put his own name on them, not just the company. There were outstanding payments to vendors. There were, apparently, 2 lawsuits in early stages. The Porsche, which was leased, was 3 payments behind. The house, which they had refinanced twice, had a mortgage balance that would make most people's stomach drop. I sat in my kitchen listening to my mother's voice, and I felt a cold, quiet feeling settle over me. Not surprise, exactly. More like the sensation of watching something confirm what you already suspected. We're going to help him, my mother said. As a family, I asked her what that meant. She told me that she and my father had been thinking about assets they could leverage. They mentioned their savings, which were modest. They mentioned the land. There it was. Mom, I said, carefully, you know that land belongs to me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, we thought, it's still family land, Maya. It's always been family land. Marcus really needs help right now. I told her I understood that Marcus needed help. I told her I was very sorry to hear about the situation. And then I told her, gently but clearly, that the land had been legally transferred to my name 6 years ago, with signed documentation, and that it was not available as a family asset. My mother said she needed to talk to my father and would call me back. She didn't call me back. Marcus did. He called that evening, and his voice was different from the usual Marcus voice. There was no leaning back, no glass swirling. He sounded tired and tight, like a rubber band stretched too close to its limit. He said he needed me to understand the gravity of what was happening. He said that this wasn't just about him, it was about the family name, about protecting what my parents had built, about being there for each other when it mattered. He said a lot of things that were technically true, but arranged in a way that was designed to make me feel that refusing to help was the same as causing the problem. At one point, he said, "You've always had everything handed to you and never had to take a real risk." I want to sit with that sentence for a second, because I think it's important. I worked 12-hour nursing shifts for years. My husband worked 6 days a week, building his business from a single van and a set of tools. We had not had anything handed to us. What we had was a habit of spending less than we earned and making decisions that didn't impress anyone at the dinner table. I told Marcus I would think about it. I wanted to talk to Derek first. Derek listened to the whole thing, and when I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What is he actually asking you to do?" I said I thought he was asking me to either sign over the land or take out some kind of loan against it, or possibly just give him money directly. None of it had been specified clearly, which was itself a signal, Derek said. "And if you do none of those things?" I said I suspected our relationship with most of my family would become very difficult. Derek looked at me and said, "Then it becomes very difficult, because we're not doing any of those things." I love my husband for a lot of reasons. That steadiness, that clarity that is near the top of the list. The next 2 months were some of the most uncomfortable of my life. My mother called me twice a week. The calls were never explicitly about the money or the land, they were always about how Marcus was struggling, how Diane was under so much stress, how it would mean so much to the family if I could just be flexible. My father sent me a text once that said, simply, "Family first. Think about it." I stared at that text for a while. I thought about all the times that sentiment had been invoked in one direction only. My mother's 60th birthday party was coming up, and she had, before all of this started, planned a dinner at a nice restaurant, something she had been looking forward to for months. About 5 weeks before the dinner, she called and told me it had evolved. Marcus had insisted on making it bigger. He was organizing an event at a venue, inviting extended family, making it something to remember. I understood immediately what he was doing. He was creating an audience. I talked to Derek about it that night. I told him I was thinking about going and not saying anything, just letting things play out. Derek asked me what I thought would happen. I said I thought Marcus would find some way, in front of everyone, to apply maximum public pressure, to frame it as the family gathering together to help him, with the implication that I was the one choosing not to join, making me the villain in front of an audience. Derek said, "Then you need to be ready." I spent the next 5 weeks being ready. I called the lawyer who had handled the original land transfer. I got the documentation organized. I am not going to lie to you and say I wasn't nervous. I was. But I also understood that I had done nothing wrong. I had purchased that land legally, with my own money, through a process that everyone had agreed to and signed. The fact that it was now inconvenient for someone else was not my problem to solve. The venue Marcus had booked was nice, a private room at a restaurant downtown, round tables with floral centerpieces, my mother's photos on a display board by the entrance. There were about 40 people there. My aunt and uncle from out of state, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my parents' friends. It was the kind of gathering where everyone was dressed up and the energy was warm and celebratory, and I felt the wrongness of what was about to happen, sitting in my chest like a stone. Derek was beside me. He had worn the gray suit he wore to our friend's wedding, and he looked good in it, and he put his hand on my lower back when we walked in and kept it there. Dinner went fine, mostly. I sat with Derek and my cousin Rihanna and her husband, and we talked about normal things, and I kept watching Marcus across the room. He was doing his performance, laughing loudly, working the room, telling stories. Diane sat very still and drank her wine and didn't say much. I noticed that. After the main course, before dessert was served, my father stood up to give a toast. He talked about my mother, about how much she meant to everyone, about family being the most important thing. It was genuine and warm, and I felt real tenderness listening to it. And then, when he sat down, Marcus stood up. He started with the family speech, how much this gathering meant, how times had been challenging for everyone lately, how the true test of a family was how they showed up for each other in difficulty. He talked about his company, not by name, but obliquely some setbacks, a season of recalibration. People around the room nodded with the polite sympathy you give to someone who is clearly building toward something. Then he said that the family had an opportunity to come together around a shared asset land that had been in the family for generations, and that he hoped they could discuss it openly, as a family, because it was going to require everyone's willingness to be flexible. He looked at me when he said flexible. Every head at every table swiveled slightly in my direction. That was the point. That was the whole architecture of the moment, make me the person who either agreed in front of everyone or became the person who refused in front of everyone. I felt Derek's hand find mine under the table. I stood up. Marcus looked surprised. I don't think he expected me to stand. I think he expected me to sit there and absorb it, or maybe to speak privately later, to be handled. I said that I appreciated him bringing this up, because it gave me the opportunity to clarify something important for the whole family. I said that the land he was referring to had been purchased by me, with my own money, 6 years ago, through a legal transaction with full documentation, signed by both of my parents, and notarized. I said that I had the paperwork if anyone wanted to see it. I said that I was sorry my brother was going through a difficult time, genuinely, but that the land was mine, had been mine for 6 years, and was not part of any family asset pool. I said all of this calmly, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, just as facts, stated clearly. The room was very quiet. Marcus said, "Maya, this is not the place." I said, "You made it the place." My aunt, who is my father's sister and has always been fair-minded, asked my father directly whether what I was saying was true. My father looked at the table. My mother's face had gone a particular shade, and then my father said quietly, "Yes, it's her land." We signed the papers. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet confirmation in a room that had gone still, and Marcus standing there with nothing left to say that wouldn't reveal exactly what he had been trying to do. He sat down. I sat down. Derek leaned close to my ear and said, very quietly, "There she is." I spent the rest of the evening talking to my relatives, eating dessert, listening to my mother's friends tell stories about her. I hugged my mother before we left. She held on for an extra second, and I don't know exactly what that meant, but I let her hold on. In the car afterward, Derek drove and I watched the streetlights go by, and I thought about my brother's face when he sat down. I want to be honest with you, there was not a lot of satisfaction in it. There was mostly just a tiredness, and a kind of quiet, and the awareness that things were going to be different now, whether I wanted them to be or not. The reality caught up quickly, the way it does once the performance is over. The company filed for bankruptcy protection 6 weeks after the dinner. The house, the one Derek had diagnosed correctly years before, went into foreclosure proceedings. The leasing company repossessed the Porsche. I know this not because my family told me, but because some of it became a matter of public record, and because my cousin Rihanna and I had grown closer since the dinner and she told me things. Marcus and Diane moved into a rental, a 2-bedroom. My mother told me this with a particular weight in her voice, waiting for me to feel something about it. And I did feel something. I felt sad for them. Genuinely. Living in a 2-bedroom rental is not a punishment. Most people live in rentals, their whole lives, and are fine. But I understood what my mother was communicating, which was that the mighty had fallen, and wasn't it something? My brother called me once, about 2 months later. It was a short call. He said he wanted to apologize for how things had gone at the dinner. He said it hadn't been fair of him to put me in that position. I said I appreciated him saying that. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was fine. He asked about Derek, and I said Derek was well, business was good. There was a pause, and then he said, "You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." I said thank you. It wasn't the most satisfying conversation I've ever had, but it was real, and that counts for something. The land is still mine. It's been mine for 6 years, and it will be mine for however long I choose to hold it. I'm not going to build a mansion on it. I've been thinking about something smaller, maybe a structure we can rent out, something that generates steady income, nothing flashy. Derek has already started drawing up rough electrical plans, because that is who he is. I've been thinking a lot lately about what my brother said to me years ago, that comfortable is just another word for giving up. I used to carry that sentence around like a bruise. Now I think he was wrong about what comfortable means. Comfortable, to me, means sleeping at night. It means not having to perform for a room. It means knowing that what I have is real, because I built it carefully, not because I convinced someone to believe in it. Disruption was my brother's favorite word. He said it constantly, disrupting markets, disrupting industries, disrupting the status quo. I used to feel small when he said it. Now I think about what disruption actually costs. The vendors who weren't paid. The investors who lost money. The 2-bedroom rental. I never disrupted anything. I just showed up, consistently, and made quiet decisions, and waited. My mother's birthday dinner still gets mentioned sometimes when the family gathers. It has become a kind of marker before the dinner, after the dinner. I don't know how exactly people tell the story, because I'm not in those conversations. I can only tell you how I experienced it, as the moment I stopped waiting for someone to give me credit, and simply stated, out loud, and in front of everyone who needed to hear it, what was already true. Derek made coffee when we got home that night. He put a mug in front of me and sat down across the table, and we just sat there for a while in the quiet of our kitchen, in our house, which is not large or impressive, and is ours in every sense of the word. Outside, there was the sound of the neighborhood, which is an ordinary neighborhood, and the refrigerator making the noise it always makes, and nothing dramatic at all. "You okay?" Derek said. I thought about it honestly. I said, "Yeah, I am." He nodded. He drank his coffee. Outside, it started to rain. That's the part nobody ever expects to be the end of the story. The coffee, the kitchen, the rain. They want a bigger ending. They want a speech, or a final confrontation, or a moment where someone looks you in the eye and admits everything. I understand that. I wanted those things too, once. But what I have is this: a clear title on a piece of land, a husband who poured me coffee, a job I'm good at, numbers that are mine and real, and not performing for anyone. My brother once told me I didn't dream big enough. I think he was looking at the wrong thing.